Ethan Whitman had waited all week for this moment. The breeze was sharp, the lake was calm, and his brand new jet ski sat humming on the dock like a caged animal ready to be unleashed. He wasn't some reckless teen either. Ethan was a 38-year-old civil engineer who had finally moved out to the peaceful, wooded lakefront community of Lakeshore Pines after saving for 10 years. But his neighbors weren't exactly the welcoming committee. Across the cove, tucked between manicured hedges and overregulated gardens, HOA President Marlene Kruger spotted Ethan like a hawk from her second-story sunroom. She didn't need binoculars. The sound of a jet ski engine revving up was, to her, no different than an air raid siren. Her face twisted, her tea spilled, as she stormed out in her designer house slippers toward the whole emergency text thread, which she used far more often than necessary. Ethan kicked off from the dock, carving smooth turns across the lake, unaware that a suburban storm was forming. By the time he coasted back in for a water break, 3 board members, including a retired dentist, a guy who called himself security, and Marlene herself, were waiting at the shore like they were preparing for a trial. Marlene spoke. First, lips pursed so tight it looked like she hadn't smiled since Clinton's first term. "You can't ride that here," she said, arms crossed. "This lake is under HOA jurisdiction, and we don't allow motorized vehicles." Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry. What? This lake's outside the HOA's boundary. I checked that before I bought." "Doesn't matter," she snapped. "You're disturbing the peace, violating our bylaws, and threatening native wildlife. You need to remove the jet ski by sundown or face daily fines." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he walked up to the storage shed, grabbed his folder of property documents, and began flipping. What he found wasn't just paperwork. It was fuel for something far bigger. Back inside his cabin, he pulled up a digital parcel map. There, in bright lines, was the border of the HOA's domain, and it stopped just short of the lake's edge. Ethan's parcel, fully independent, fully legal, and fully outside their control. Instead of confronting Marlene right away, Ethan decided to do something better. The next morning, he invited a few friends over for a barbecue, and yes, they brought jet skis, but Marlene wasn't finished. She made calls, she talked to a local fish and game volunteer. She even contacted the sheriff's department to report reckless aquatic behavior, which is not a thing in any law book, but she was determined. And when a county deputy actually rolled up that afternoon, Ethan didn't panic. He simply handed over the map. The deputy raised one brow, nodded once, and walked toward Marlene, who had already started preparing her rehearsed speech. But before she could finish a single sentence, the deputy held up one hand and said 5 simple words. That made Ethan smile from across the lawn. "You have no authority here." Marlene turned pale, but Ethan knew this wasn't over, because people like her don't walk away. They plowed. Ethan had no idea what Marlene would do next, but trust, she wasn't done making waves. Keep watching, because the real storm was only just beginning. 2 days after the deputy left empty-handed, the skies over Lakeshore Pines darkened, and it wasn't just because of the summer storm rolling in. Ethan woke up to find a bright orange flyer nailed to his dock post. In bold, all caps letters, it read, "Notice of unapproved activity subject to review by HOA compliance panel." It wasn't even official, just a cheap printout taped over his property marker. But Ethan knew exactly who was behind it. Marlene had pivoted from playing sheriff to pretending she was a zoning commissioner, and she was dragging her little HOA circle with her. That afternoon, while clouds cracked and thunder echoed across the lake, Ethan spotted her again, umbrella in hand, standing just beyond his boundary line like she was surveying enemy territory. This time, she wasn't alone. Greg Baxter, the so-called security director of the HOA, stood beside her in tactical rain gear like he was part of a SWAT unit. From mailboxes. Ethan could barely contain his laugh. "You guys gonna arrest the ducks next?" Greg didn't answer. Marlene lifted her phone and started recording. "We're documenting ongoing disturbances," she declared. "You're violating community peace and ignoring HOA bylaws. We have witnesses. We're escalating this to the board." "Funny," Ethan replied, waving toward the lake, "because from this angle, it looks like you're trespassing." He turned and walked back inside, letting the screen door slap shut behind him. He didn't bother arguing anymore. Not with people who thought their clipboard came with a badge. But the next day, retaliation got more creative. Someone filed a complaint with the local environmental department. accusing Ethan of fuel leaks contaminating the lake. Within 48 hours, a state inspector showed up. Ethan calmly showed him the sealed fuel dock, his spotless maintenance logs, and a receipt for the Eco-certified engine upgrade he'd had done just last month. The inspector shrugged and said, "Sorry, man, someone clearly doesn't like you." Then a utility truck showed up, claiming there was a report of unauthorized irrigation lines on the lakeside. That one made Ethan chuckle. He barely had sprinklers, let alone illegal pipes, but the visits kept piling up, 4 in 1 week each from different agencies. He wasn't being fined, not officially, but the message was clear. Marlene wasn't going to stop. She was trying to drown him in bureaucracy, delay, and nuisance, and while her hands appeared clean, Ethan knew the game. She was testing how far she could push before someone snapped. That night, as rain drizzled against the cabin's windows, Ethan sat at his desk under a dim reading lamp, flipping through his files. He pulled out aerial maps, a digital survey, even a signed letter from the original developer confirming the lake's non-HOA status. He wasn't just gathering papers anymore. He was building the case. And then he found it, something even he hadn't noticed before. A scanned note buried in a utility easement file that mentioned a long-forgotten access clause. For the public. It meant something bigger. Ethan zoomed in on the plat map. If that clause was still valid, it could trigger a reclassification of shoreline ownership, not just for him, but for everyone in Lakeshore Pines. And that would make Marlene's authority collapse faster than a sandcastle. In the rain, but before Ethan could take action, a loud thud echoed from outside. He grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door. There, lying at the edge of his dock, was his jet ski, pushed off its mount, scratched across the hole, and still dripping. Ethan scanned the tree line, the road, beyond the fence. No one in sight, no cameras nearby, but someone had crossed the line, and this time, it was no longer about noise complaints. Ethan didn't start the war, but after tonight, he knew how it would end. Stick with the story. The next move would shake the entire HOA to its core. By sunrise, Ethan had moved the damaged jet ski onto sawhorses in his shed. The deep scratches along the side weren't from normal wear. Someone had used for possibly a crowbar or heavy boot to kick it loose from its mount. The lake was quiet now, but the silence felt heavier than usual, like the water itself knew something was off. Ethan didn't bother calling the HOA. Instead, he went straight to the sheriff's office with his photos, timestamps, and a detailed log of every complaint and inspection he'd endured since Marlene began her crusade. Deputy Carson, the same one who'd walked off after seeing the map, sat across from him in the small, wood-paneled station. "She's escalating," Ethan said, calm but direct. "I didn't move here to start a fight, but this is turning into harassment." Carson nodded, thumbing through the file. "Technically, she hasn't broken any laws, but this is borderline. I'll file an incident report. That jet ski didn't roll off by itself. Can you do anything else?" "Not yet, but keep documenting, and if you catch anyone trespassing, call us immediately." Back home, Ethan installed motion lights, set up the trail cams near the dock, and started uploading every document he had into a cloud folder. He wasn't tech savvy, but even he knew backup was essential when dealing with people who thought roles only applied to others. By midweek, the sun returned and so did the HOA. This time, it wasn't just Marlene. She arrived with the full board, clipboards in hand, forming a line along the gravel road just past Ethan's mailbox. Greg, the self-appointed enforcer, held what looked like a rolled-up blueprint. Janice, the secretary, wore a hat that read HOA proud and sunglasses too large for her face. They weren't there to talk. They were staging a perimeter. Ethan stood on his porch and crossed his arms. "Don't you folks get bored?" he called out. "Or are you planning a parade this time?" "We're conducting a site assessment," Marlene replied, not looking up from her clipboard. "Of what?" "Potential zoning infractions related to excessive watercraft usage." Ethan laughed. "You mean my jet ski? There are noise limits," she snapped, "and concerns about erosion, wildlife safety, and community tranquility." Greg stepped forward, unrolling the paper in his hand. It was a hand-drawn map of the neighborhood, copied badly from a real survey, with red circles drawn in crayon around Ethan's cabin, the dock, and even the barbecue pit. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Did you make that in a kindergarten art class?" Marlene's jaw tightened. We are forming a subcommittee for shoreline environmental compliance. This is serious. Great, Ethan said. Let me know when you form the subcommittee for common sense. He walked back inside, letting the door creak slowly behind him. Later that night, the lake glowed under a crescent moon. Ethan sat on his back deck, sipping coffee. The trail cam silently watching the perimeter. He didn't see Marlene again that day, but someone else showed up at 4:14 a.m. His phone buzzed. The trail cam had picked up motion, a tall figure in a hoodie creeping toward the dock. Staying low, moving quick, Ethan opened the footage and paused. It wasn't Greg, too slim. Not Janice either. Someone unfamiliar. The figure approached the waterline, looked around, then reached into a backpack. The next frames were blurry, but Ethan could see a long object, maybe a pipe, being tucked beneath the dock supports. Then the figure slipped away into the dark. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and ran down, heart pounding. He searched under the dock, moving cautiously. At first, he saw nothing. Then, near the far end, wedged between the rocks and support beam, he spotted a capped PVC tube, sealed shut on both ends and wrapped in zip ties. It wasn't leaking, but it was heavy. He pulled it out, dragged it to shore, and opened it with gloved hands. Inside were 6 pages of legal printouts, the photos of Ethan on his jet ski, and a typed, unsigned letter that read, "You were warned. This is only the beginning." He stood still, the night wind rushing through the trees. This wasn't petty anymore. This was calculated, and whoever had delivered that tube wasn't just working alone. Someone in Lakeshore Pines had gone off the rails, and Ethan was done waiting. Don't blink. The next piece of the puzzle would pull back the curtain on a secret even the sheriff didn't see coming. By morning, the PVC tube and its contents were locked inside Ethan's safe. The sealed message wasn't just threatening, it hinted at something deeper, a scheme hidden beneath HOA rules and lakefront smiles. Ethan didn't believe for a second that Marlene had written it herself. The tone was colder, more calculated. Someone else in Lakeshore Pines had taken the crusade to a darker level. Still, he played it cool. He mowed his lawn, waved to the mailman, grilled lunch on the back patio, but behind the casual routine, Ethan was watching everything. At 6 p.m., he got the lead he needed. While flipping through the HOA's online newsletter archives, Ethan noticed a curious detail. An issue dated 3 years ago listed Marlene as president of committee oversight for East Bay. That was before she became HOA president. The article included a line about quiet compliance testing for shoreline residents. Curious wording. Compliance testing. He dug deeper. Buried in a PDF from the same month was an agenda note about establishing long-term lakefront governance via deed reclassification. It was vague, likely intentionally, but it included a reference to parcel, to BL, which, according to Ethan's records, sat directly next to his land. The strange part, parcel to BL didn't legally exist anymore. It had been absorbed into the county's open access land 10 years ago, after the original owner forfeited it in a tax sale. The HOA shouldn't have access to it, yet it was clearly being referenced. As leverage. Ethan printed the documents and highlighted the connection. If the HOA had been claiming jurisdiction over land they didn't own, and enforcing policies through threats like the one left under his dock, they could be in deep legal trouble. That night, he walked the edge of his property and stepped over onto what used to be parcel to BL. Nothing but trees, brush, and a faint gravel path led toward the community's garden plots on the far side. But something about the stillness made Ethan slow down. About 20 yards in, he noticed a set of fresh tire marks in the dirt, not big enough for a car, too wide for a bike, maybe an ATV. He followed the trail to a clearing with a makeshift shed, low to the ground, covered in commo netting. The kind of thing you'd expect from a paranoid hunter, not a suburban HOA. The door wasn't locked, just latched. Inside were plastic tubs labeled with dates, addresses, and printed tags. Some read unsanctioned patio extension, others listed names, neighbors he recognized. There were photos, complaint forms, handwritten notes, and at least one stack of documents marked private do not, COPY. And right there, on top of the most recent pile, was a printed satellite map with Ethan's home circled in red. He took photos of everything. Then he froze. From outside the shed, twigs snapped. Deliberate, slow. Ethan crouched and killed his phone light. He could hear someone breathing beyond the tree line. Whoever it was, they weren't moving quickly. It was as if they were waiting for him to come out. He slipped out the back of the shed and ducked low, circling through brush until he reached the gravel again. The entire walk home, he didn't see a soul, but his instinct screamed that someone was watching. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, a plain white envelope appeared in his mailbox. No stamp, no name. Inside was a single photo, grainy and taken that night, showing Ethan leaving. The shed dot written on the back in ballpoint ink, "Next time, we won't miss you." He stared at it for a full minute, heart pounding, then tucked it back into the envelope. The line had been crossed. This wasn't about the jet ski anymore. This wasn't even about the lake. It was about control, and someone in Lakeshore Pines was willing to break the law to keep it. Ethan had the proof, but if he moved too fast, he'd lose his only chance to expose the game behind the gates. Stay locked in. The next chapter brings secrets that go far beyond property lines. By dawn, Ethan was done playing defense. He packed the satellite photos, the document snapshots from the shed, and a threatening letter into a folder labeled parcel fraud. He wasn't about to be run off his own land by clipboard warriors. With a private surveillance shack, someone had built an unofficial archive of HOA dirt, and the deeper he looked, the more it stunk of paranoia, secrets, and some kind of rogue operation buried beneath HOA policy. Ethan decided he wouldn't take the information to Marlene. Not yet. Instead, he called someone else, an old college friend named Darren Willis, who happened to be a real estate lawyer to counties over. He didn't mention names on the call, just property boundaries, forged authority, and a very motivated neighborhood group. Darren agreed to take a look and promised discretion. Back in Lakeshore Pines, the HOA board moved fast too, but in the wrong direction. That afternoon, a new HOA compliance letter appeared on Ethan's door. It was more aggressive than before. "You are hereby ordered to cease use of unauthorized watercraft within 72 hours or face lien procedures." There was one problem. They weren't allowed to issue liens on Ethan's property. The HOA is legal. Reach in at 50 feet before his shoreline. They were bluffing hard, but someone was hoping he wouldn't know that. Later that night, Ethan drove to the far edge of town, where Darren agreed to meet him off the books. They sat in an old diner booth under buzzing lights as Ethan laid out everything: the hidden shed, the map photos, the mailed threats, and the false parcel records. Darren flipped through the folder silently, his eyes narrowing at certain pages. "This is bad," he finally said. "Not just civil violation bad. This could be criminal. If they're knowingly enforcing rules on property they don't govern, and storing personal data on homeowners in an unregulated location, they're opening themselves up to lawsuits, maybe even prosecution." Ethan leaned in. "So what do I do?" "You wait," Darren replied. "Let me file a private request with the county records office. If I can confirm what I think I'm seeing, we may be able to get an injunction. But keep your cool. Don't tip them off. And whatever you do, don't go back to that shed." Ethan nodded, though he didn't love the idea of waiting. But by the time he got home, the situation had already escalated. His front yard was littered with anonymous flyers. One stapled to a tree read, "Dangerous neighbor report to hole immediately." Another one said, "Unstable individual owns weapons, stay away." None of it was true, of course. But truth wasn't the point. They were trying to isolate him, turn the neighborhood against him. He glanced across the road and saw the curtain drop in the living room of the house opposite his. The neighbors were watching. Back inside, his phone buzzed. A blocked number, one voicemail. He played it. The voice was male, raspy and distorted, likely through a filter. "You think you're going to expose us? You don't even know who us is." Click. No name, no number, just static. Ethan sat down, finally understanding that the war wasn't between him and Marlene anymore. She might have started it, but someone else, maybe multiple people, had taken over. Someone with more to lose. Someone trying to cover a mistake, or maybe even a crime. And just as that thought landed, his email pinged with a scanned copy from Darren. It was a 2008 land transfer document for parcel to BL, and it had a signature line with a name he recognized. Instantly, Gregory or Baxter, the same Greg who strutted around Lakeshore Pines with his security badge, barking about noise complaints and throwing out made-up rules. Only this time, his name was listed as temporary trustee for oversight. Transfer, a title that didn't legally exist. Ethan zoomed in on the document's seal. It had been notarized. In the wrong county, forged, sloppy, and fake. They weren't just pretending to have power. They created it out of thin air. Ethan wasn't chasing a feud anymore. He'd stumbled into a full-blown covered dash-up dot, and if Greg was behind it, there's no telling how far it stretched. Stay with it, because the next move would flip everything upside down. Greg Baxter wasn't just some overzealous HOA security chief. He was the architect. As Ethan stared at the forged land transfer on his screen, the pieces snapped into place. Greg had created a phantom title, temporary trustee for oversight transfer, to slide the abandoned parcel into HOA control. But it was never legal. The county system still showed the land as publicly managed, tax-exempt, and unassigned to any private authority. Yet for over a decade, Greg had used that fake power to claim dominion over the lakeshore dot, and now Ethan had the proof. Still, he knew this wasn't the kind of lie you exposed without backup. People who go to this length don't apologize. They retaliate. So Ethan called Darren again. I need to go public. Carefully, Darren agreed, but added, one condition, let me file an emergency complaint with the county first. If Greg's name is on multiple neighborhood filings, we need the local land commissioner to freeze any activity. That gives you room to breathe. Ethan nodded. Then I'm going to find out who else knew, because this kind of deception doesn't stay quiet for long. Someone on the HOA board had to have seen those documents, maybe even sign off on them. That included Marlene. That evening, Ethan attended the monthly HOA meeting in the community clubhouse. It was his first appearance in 3 years. Marlene, wearing her usual floral scarf and tight smile, sat at the head of the table with her gavel in front of her like a prop she didn't know how to use. Greg leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, trying to look indifferent. Ethan signed it, took a seat, and waited. The first 20 minutes were routine. Budget items, landscaping bids, pool maintenance. Then Marlene cleared her throat. Before we adjourn, there's a final concern from the board regarding ongoing disturbances on the east lakefront. Mr. Whitman, would you care to address the issue of your continued use of watercraft? Ethan stood slowly. Actually, I'd like to discuss something else. He reached into his bag and placed a stack of printed documents on the center table. This is a 2008 land transfer for parcel to BL. He began. It's fake. The signature is fake. The seal is fake. And the title is based on temporary trustee for oversight transfer, was never legally recognized. Marlene looked stunned. Greg didn't move. Ethan turned to the other board members. You've all been enforcing policies based on false jurisdiction. This means every complaint, every fine, every so-called violation on properties near the lake, none of it was valid. One member, Janice. The secretary shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You're saying the HOA doesn't control that land? She asked. I'm saying Greg forged a document to make it look like you did, Ethan replied. Greg finally pushed off the wall, his voice calm, but cold. That's a pretty serious accusation. Ethan didn't flinch. Good, because I filed a formal complaint with the county this morning. You'll be getting a letter. The room froze. Then Marlene stood, hands trembling slightly. Greg, is that true? Greg's jaw clenched. We needed a buffer zone for the community. You all voted for it? No. Janice whispered. We voted to petition the county, not to fake a transfer. That's when the dam cracked. The board members began asking questions. One stormed out. Another demanded Greg explain the documents Ethan had brought. Marlene, pale and shaken, sat back down. Ethan didn't say another word. He left the papers and walked out into the humid night. Back at his cabin, he stood by the water, watching the wind push tiny waves across the lake. He had forced the truth out, but something still gnawed at him. He checked his phone. A voicemail from Darren. Double quotes Ethan. The county responded, You're not gonna believe this. Greg didn't just fake one document. He filed 3 more land transfers under different names, and one of them isn't even in the HOA. Ethan's breath caught. That meant someone outside Lakeshore Pines had been helping. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble anymore. It was a shell game with property deeds, and the next name on the paperwork might just explain the threatening notes, the fake complaints, and why someone had risked everything to silence him. Ethan had exposed the lie, but the bigger truth still lurked beneath, and the real mastermind, about to be unmasked. Don't miss what's next. The twist will change everything. The next morning, Ethan paced the shoreline with a legal pad in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. The lake looked calm, but his thoughts were anything but. Darren's voicemail replayed in his head 3 more forged transfers. 1. Under a name that didn't belong to anyone in Lakeshore Pines. Ethan called him back immediately. Who's the outsider? Darren sounded tense. Her name is Sharon Dupree. Ring a bell. Ethan blinked. No. Should it? She's listed as the administrative advisor for a consulting firm based in Sacramento. The same firm that helped draft the HOA's original expansion proposal back in 2010. Ethan squinted toward the HOA side of the lake. You're telling me a consulting firm is behind all this? Not exactly. Here's where it gets weird. Darren continued. Sharon Dupree doesn't exist. What? I had my paralegal run her info through multiple databases. No property, no voter records, no tax filings. And the signature on the land transfer under her name? It matches one from Greg's old building permit applications. Ethan's stomach dropped. Greg had created a fake co-signer. A fake person. A fake consultant to authorize land grabs through paperwork no one ever thought to verify. Darren kept going. It gets worse. One of those documents places ownership of a portion of the public shoreline under Sharon's name. And that's the exact same spot the whole recently fenced off and labeled as community private beach. It was a scam. Greg had used fake identities and shady documentation to build a power structure. And Marlene, despite her loud personality and clipboard crusades, might have only been a pawn. Ethan didn't wait. He drove straight to the county registrar's office. There, he requested copies of every parcel adjustment filed under the HOA's name or its subcommittees. It took hours. But by the end of the day, he had a pile of papers and all the dots connected. Greg had submitted for land alterations in total. 2 were signed under Sharon Dupree. 1 listed Marlene as a verifier, and the 4th was oddly left unsigned, but bore the HOA stamp. Ethan returned home. Exhausted, but boiling with resolve. He uploaded everything to a cloud drive titled Lakeshore Fraud, and just before sunset, sent the link anonymously to every homeowner in the community. He didn't add a message, just the subject line. You deserve to know. By nightfall, his phone exploded. Texts, emails. One neighbor even came to his front door just to shake his hand. Word spread like wildfire. The next morning, whole panic set in. The community message. Board shut down temporarily. Marlene called an emergency board meeting. Greg, strangely, was nowhere to be seen. That afternoon, as Ethan sat on his back porch watching the ripples on the water, a county code enforcement vehicle pulled into the HOA clubhouse lot. Across the lake. Then a second one. And finally, a black SUV from the assessor's office. Within 20 minutes, yellow tape went up around the fake community beach. Neighbors gathered. Voices rose. The illusion was collapsing in real time, but Ethan's peace didn't last long. An alert hit his phone. A new file uploaded to the shared drive. From an unknown sender. Just a single document. A scanned contract. 5 pages, titled Authorization for Oversight Collaboration Agreement. It was signed by Greg Baxter, but beneath Greg's signature, in a faded line, was another signature. Marlene Kruger, and the date, it was from 2 months before the first phony land transfer ever took place. Ethan's breath caught. She knew, all this time, the fake consultant, the illegal maps, the threats. Marlene had signed off on the foundation of it all. She wasn't just a pawn. She was the architect. The queen of the clipboard didn't just follow the rules. She bent them into weapons. Now exposed. The truth would finally shatter Lakeshore Pines from the inside out. Don't blink. The final move is coming, and it's nothing like they expected. For 2 full days, the HOA clubhouse sat in silent chaos. The tape around the fake community beach fluttered in the breeze like a warning flag. Homeowners whispered on porches. Group chats lit up with screenshots and accusations. And Greg Baxter hadn't shown his face since the cloud folder went public. But Marlene Kruger, she stayed strangely calm. Ethan watched from his back deck as she strutted across the community lawn one afternoon, sunglasses on, scarf blowing dramatically, acting like nothing had happened, as if the firestorm hadn't started on her watch. But the truth was finally catching up. That evening, the county clerk's office made it official. The Lakeshore Pines HOA was under formal investigation for fraudulent land transfers, unauthorized jurisdiction claims, and the illegal posting of enforcement signs on public property. Then the real blow came. An anonymous leak, most likely from within the board, delivered internal HOA emails to a group of homeowners. Ethan received a copy in one message dated just 6 months ago. Marlene wrote to Greg, If no one checks the parcel numbers, we're fine. Just keep the signature neat this time. That line was enough. The next night, at the rescheduled emergency board meeting, more than 60 homeowners showed up, some angry, others stunned. A few just curious to see what a meltdown looked like up close. Marlene opened the meeting like it was business as usual. Let's all remember to be civil. We're here to support the integrity of Lakeshore Pines. But the crowd didn't want rehearsed speeches. One homeowner shouted, "You signed it." Another held up a copy of the fake contract. "We trusted you." Ethan stayed near the back, arms folded, watching it unfold. When someone demanded she step down, Marlene smirked and replied, "You can't vote me out without a process." Then came the final twist. A quiet voice rose from the second row. Janice, the HOA secretary. "I checked the bylaws," she said, holding up a binder. "If 2/3 of the board agree to remove an officer for cause, it's immediate." Gasps filled the room. The board members stood. "I vote to remove her," one said. "So do I," added the other. Marlene's smile collapsed. Greg, nowhere in sight, had already resigned by email earlier that morning. The vote passed. Marlene was no longer HOA president. She tried to speak, but the gavel that had been her symbol of control was quietly removed from the table by Janice. Ethan left without a word. There was nothing else to say. The next week, a county notice went up along the dock. Lakeshore Pines HOA jurisdictional boundaries officially recertified. No authority beyond point A. Right where Ethan's property began, his jet ski, fully repaired, was back in the water by Saturday. This time, no one protested. Instead, a few neighbors brought folding chairs down to the shoreline. One waved as Ethan zipped by. The little girl even asked if she could ride one someday. He smiled, knowing the noise wasn't what disturbed the peace. It was the truth. Later that night, as he sipped coffee on the dock and looked out over the still lake, his phone buzzed. A message from Darren County. "Issued a cease and desist. Marlene's lawyer just called me. She's in full damage control." Ethan didn't reply. He had no interest in revenge. He had his shoreline, his freedom, and a lake that finally felt quiet for the right reasons. Some fights aren't about fences or noise or rules. They're about standing your ground when someone tries to rewrite the map. Ethan didn't just win a battle, he exposed the lie holding an entire neighborhood hostage. If you've ever dealt with power-hungry neighbors or fake authority, share your story below and subscribe for more real tales of unexpected justice.